start. So fences 101. This is all done in the context of boundary due diligence, right? This is all done in the context of your realtor. You're either representing a potential a buyer or you're representing a seller. And all too often, what we believe, what we try and get away with, I guess, is the fact that, yeah, you know what, fences are always on the boundary, or they're close enough. We don't need to worry about it. We always come back to this idea of what is the extent of title? Well, our buyer is on the property, it's on the house itself, and even the seller is trying to make the house look beautiful and fantastic. At the end of the day, people are buying and selling, they're transacting land. An extent of title means where does my land start and end, and where does the neighbor's land start and end. Understanding what you own is so critical in this day and age when things are becoming so litigious that people are fighting over the most incredibly small things, especially in urban areas. We see it all the time in the Greater Toronto area. Even out here in Little Old Guelph, we're seeing it more and more now. So anyway, so let's make a start. So here's what we're going to go through today, okay? The fence is on the boundary, right? That's the question we're going to basically ask and answer. We're going to look at fences on surveys because at the end of the day, for you to do good boundary due diligence, you need to be able to identify fences on the survey plan. Excuse me. And you need to be able to understand how to look at a survey plan and very quickly identify where those fences are in relation to the boundary and easements and so on. Where do I build my fence? We're going to look at how you go about determining where to build your fence, or if a client asks you some rules and some guidelines around building a fence. Then we're going to look at fences with respect to land status, adverse possession, and title insurance. Just to give you a couple of reminders, we kind of covered this in each one of those previous webinars. I'm going to touch on them right here, just to get you grounded back into how fences relate to those three areas. And then finally, fences and boundary due diligence, and we're going to dip into the BoundaryWise Academy at the end and hopefully get a few of you signed up. I got to tell you, we are so grateful to you guys. So many of you have signed up for the BoundaryWise Academy, gone through it, taken the tests, taken the exams, graduated, got the CBW professional designation, are out there flying with it, making a difference and adding value to your customers' lives. So well done. Thank you, you guys. And for everyone else, come on, guys, let's get in there. Get this designation. It's a good one. So here we go. Let's start off with an example. And if you were with us last week, and I know quite a few of you here were, if you were with us last week, you'll remember that we looked at this Silver Birch Avenue, excuse me, the Silver Birch Avenue property. I want to come back to it today because it's an interesting one. And what I want to do is take a look at specifically, again, the back area right here. That's the area we're going to focus on. And the reason we're going to focus on it is because there's a pretty significant encroachment that involves not just a shed at the back, but also the fence. And if you remember last time, we talked about how to identify where the boundary is, right? And the boundary is where the thick dark line is. The thick dark line is always the boundary on the survey plan. So you can kind of see that. The street is on the right-hand side of your screen, and we're looking at the back there. And so in this particular case, we're looking at the back. You can see where the boundary is there, and you can see that one-story metal frame, and that metal and frame and metal clad shed is sitting way over the boundary, right? And so if we look at the picture of this now, you can see that as we look at this, and if we were just to look at this property, just examine it with the naked eye, we see the shed, we see the fence at the back. But what we actually see when we look at the survey plan is that the boundary is nowhere near the fence. In fact, well, the boundary is where it is. Sorry, wrong way to put that. The fence is actually way, way back. Almost a meter behind the boundary, and the shed crosses right over it as well. So when we look at this again, look at that back area again, and you can see very clearly that you've got the boundary, and then back from that, you've got the fence and behind the shed. We're going to look at specifically how you decipher all this information in a little while, so don't get overwhelmed by the fact that if you try to look at that and it's too small or it's a little fuzzy or whatever else, but you can see up there in the top left-hand corner, the red line is sort of cutting through it. Let me get rid of that a second. There we go. You can see it says board fence, and it tells you that it's quite a distance, 6.61 feet to the west of the one boundary and 7 feet 7 inches away from the rear boundary. That's almost 8 feet, folks, of error there, right? So the fence is on the boundary, right? Always. That's what we always hear. The fence is on the boundary. We did some research a few years back. We conducted a proper research project with a research firm and experts. And what we determined was that not only do 49% of properties in the GTA and Ontario-wide now we've discovered have one or more hidden boundary issues of one form or another, significant boundary issues. But we also found out that 99% of fences in Ontario are not on the boundary. 99%. Now, some may be off by an inch or two, others are off by a foot or two, or even more, as we just saw in this last example, 8 feet. But guys, 99% of fences are not on the boundary. What does that mean to you? What that means to you is that when you're representing a property as a listing, when you're listing a property, you got to make sure that you don't walk around telling people, yeah, the fence is the boundary. That's the extent of title. You got to make sure that you declare what the extent of title is. And sometimes it's okay to just say, hey, here's the plan of subdivision that shows the dimensions of the property. Leave it to the buyer to figure out if the fence is actually in or out or not. If you want to go a little further and actually do some disclosure, if the fence is way off, you may want to disclose that to make sure, absolutely sure, you don't end up in a situation where you've got trailing liabilities coming back. Separate from that, if we're talking about on the buying side, you can't just assume that the fence represents extent of title. You need to do your due diligence and discover, is the fence in? Is it out? Are we giving up land? Are we gaining land? Is my client going to end up in a boundary dispute with their neighbor over this? So 99% of fences in Ontario are not on the boundary. So back to this example from last week. Do you remember it? Part of the reason I love this example is because this picture was taken in the sunshine. And it makes me feel like, yeah, it's summer out there. What a great picture. I love this little house. It looks absolutely fantastic. But if you're a buyer looking at this, you go, oh, look, the fence. Is that the boundary? It must be pretty close to that, right? People always put their fence on the boundary. Let's look at the survey plan of this particular property. Hopefully you remember this one. Thick dark line is the boundary. Look at it right there. In this particular case, the walls of the house are pretty much the boundary, or the house has been built right onto the extent of title. You see the thick dark line, and you see the building structure, which is shown with the little hash marks on the inside of that rectangle. This is quite an unusual case in this case, where you've got a corner lot where the property line, the boundary, is actually almost snug right up to the building. Right there. You see that? Now, the fence is out here. It's so cute. It's absolutely delightful. It's delightful what these property owners have done. I love it. However, the fence is not on the property. And you might say, Chris, I'm sure you spent hours trying to find an example this egregious. The answer is no. 99% of fences are not on the boundary, folks. So this is the kind of situation we're looking at. The fence is almost out onto the sidewalk and nowhere near the property boundary. So if we look back at this, yes, it's an absolutely delightful little property, and they've done some wonderful landscaping here, but all that area that is enclosed by the fence, between the fence and the building, is not part of the property. So you've got to be real careful when you are representing this property. This is one where you need to say, the boundary is around the building, it's not where the fence is, because you may end up in a situation where trailing liability, a lawsuit or something comes back at you for misrepresentation. You clearly represented. If you didn't say anything, you're representing essentially that this is the property. On the buying side, please do not let your client walk into a situation like this without knowing where the boundary is and that they buy this property. It doesn't mean they won't buy the property, but at least make them aware so they can make a smart decision and not come back at you after the fact and go, how did you not know this? How could you possibly not have known this? Okay, so fences on the survey plan. Now, there are 3 things I want you to focus on when it comes to fences on the survey plan. So now you've got a survey plan of a property, right? And you're trying to determine whether or not there's an issue with fences. Remember that we are not talking about survey plans that are public plans of subdivision, reference plans, because typically they don't show structures and fences. Remember that from a previous webinar? We're talking about private surveys, the ones that are information rich, the ones that show structures and fences and buildings and driveways and patios and decks and all those wonderful things. So the first thing you're going to look for is abbreviations. The first thing that you need to understand is the abbreviations that are used on a survey plan to denote fences. So BF means a board fence. CLF usually means a chain link fence. And WIF usually means a wrought iron fence. Now, the one thing you've got to do always when you're looking at fences and looking for encroachments and things like that, you always have to go to the legend if you're unsure, because if a surveyor has used an abbreviation on the diagrammatic portion of the survey, that abbreviation will be noted in the legend with a description of what it is. So a surveyor might for example, chain link fence, they might use a different abbreviation, probably not. But say, for example, they did, that would be over in the legend. So you can go over to the legend, take a look at what that abbreviation is, find your abbreviation, and it'll tell you exactly what that is. The other reason you want to go over to the legend side of the survey plan is you want to look at the scale. We're going to look at this in a bit, because you got to understand, are we talking about metric measurements? Are we talking about imperial measurements? Or are we talking decimal feet? Each has a big implication on what you're looking at and how far in actual distance the fence is off the property line. So the first thing, abbreviations. The second thing you're going to look at is the visual depiction. Fences, when they are shown on the survey plan, in the diagrammatic part of the survey plan, are shown with this dashed line with the little X's in between. That's a fence, essentially. And the vast majority of surveys you're going to see are going to show fences like this. Now, the third thing is annotation. So a surveyor will go to great lengths, excuse me, will go to great lengths to annotate the survey, to communicate as much information not only to you, but to other surveyors as well, in terms of what they discovered on this property. So this is a zoom in of a fence between two properties. And again, the thick dark line is the boundary in between. So let's take a look at some of these annotations and everything else. So first of all, we can see the visual depiction there. Now, in this case, you're going to say, well, it's not a dotted line. It's not a dashed line, Chris. Well, hang on a second. In this case, the fence is on the boundary, and the boundary is the thick dark line that has no breaks in it. So you're not going to see a dashed line there, because it's more important that we depict the boundary. But that's why the little X's exist, to show when you've got a fence line on the boundary or on a different line, you can actually differentiate that. So you can see there that we've got a wrought iron fence. It actually says it, wrought iron fence with the little X's on the boundary. The next thing you're going to see, let's take a look at this. There's a piece of fence that's not on the boundary, obviously. It goes from the building next door to the boundary, and it says BF, which we know is a board fence, right? That's classic right there. And let's see what else. Right there, WIF, right? So there's a wrought iron fence. So you can see that between these houses, at the back there, there's a wrought iron fence that goes from the rear of the building, the top building, to the boundary, and that cuts down along the boundary to where it meets a board fence. And that board fence it then continues as a board fence, and that board fence also doglegs right angle to the two buildings as well. And so there we go. And now the annotation. So it tells you that it says WIF corner on line east-west. That means that the wrought iron fence, the corner of the wrought iron fence there, is on the property line from an east-west perspective. Now, bear in mind that I turned this 90 degrees, this image 90 degrees. It was upright, so it would have made more sense with east-west, right? But in this case, the corner is on the line, is on the east, from an east-west standpoint, it's on the property line. That's good to know, right? If it was off, it would say board fence, X number of centimeters, meters, feet, decimal feet off the property line. It would tell you that. We're going to see some of those examples in a second. Take a look at over here. It says there as well, the corner of the board fence is on the property line. So if your client is wants to know, hey, where is the fence in relation to the property line? Is it on the property line? Is it off the property line? You look at the survey plan, it says, no, it is on the property line. That is a legal documentation. It's a legal representation of the surveyor's opinion based on all the research they did as to where that property line is. So really good survey. Now, the reason I brought this one up here is because, and you can't see whose property it is, obviously, but sometimes your client is going to be in a situation where their neighbor is coming to them saying, get the fence off the property, get your fence off my property line. Sorry, get your fence off my property. It's not on the property line, it's way off. And this is actually one of those examples. And we did this survey for the next door neighbor who's being verbally abused by their next door neighbor, telling them that they knew for sure where the boundary was and it wasn't where the fence is. It's closer to our client's house. Our clients ended up doing a survey, and it showed that the fence is actually on the property line. So sometimes a survey like this shows you that you're right, and in fact, it is on the property line. It's not always about identifying when a fence is off the property line. Sometimes it's confirming that it is on the property line, and that's just as important, right? So let's look at another one here. This is another great example. And again, take a moment to look at this. Take a moment to look at this. To the right is the street, and you can see the building there. Obviously, I've cut it off, right? Because we're going to look at the back. It's the back that we're interested in. And so to the right is the street. You can see the metal-clad one-story building there on the right. And as you go back into the backyard, you can see that we've got the property line, which is the thick dark line. And then as we go to the back, you can see we've got all kinds of juicy tidbits we're going to look at. But take a look at this before we start annotating it. Look at where the property line is, the thick dark line. You see that? Now take a look at where the fence is. Can you see the little X's that mark the fence? Now, can you see areas where the fence is not on the property line? There's a couple of areas. Can you see that? Take a look. Okay, let's annotate this up, shall we? We're going to look at the back here. The back is a problem. And we're also going to look at this little bit here. Not a huge problem, but it is a little bit of a problem. Actually, if you look at the bottom one there, you can see that the fence, it actually juts in onto the property. So assuming this is our client's property, that piece of fence, it's not a straight line. It actually juts in to the property line. And it's telling us right there that the fence is 0.23, in this case it's meters, it's a metric, the scale is metric, 0.23 meters west of the property line. So the fence is 23 centimeters in on the property. Does it matter? Well, it's not for us to determine. It's up to the person who's about to pay for this property that might determine that. But that's not where the real problem is with this property. We're going to zoom into the back here and take a look at this area. So there's the boundary, just to confirm, okay? There's the boundary, the thick dark line at the back. Oops, sorry. I'm not going to go and color the rest of the boundary. You can tell where it is, right? But that's the rear boundary of the property in blue. And that is the fence that goes along the far side of the property and then cuts across. But it doesn't cut across anywhere near the boundary. And if you look at right there in green, you've got that annotation that tells us the fence is 0.02 meters, so 2 centimeters, west, and 0.71 meters north. Now, what does that mean? Well, if this was oriented the right way, again, I had to spin this, you'd know that north, in this case, north is to the right, okay? And west, is that right? Yes. Yes, that's right. North is to the right and west is up. West is vertical. So in this case, it's telling, so remember that corner, it's looking at the corner of that fence. And it's saying this corner has it's on two axes, right? It's on a north-south axis and an east-west axis. And this is telling us that it's pretty much bang on the top boundary that we're looking at, 2 centimeters. It's pretty much bang on. But in terms of its relationship to the rear boundary here, it is 71 centimeters off. That's almost a meter, guys. That's 3/4 of a meter. That's a lot. That's a significant amount of space there. So what are you representing as a seller? Are you telling anyone this? You probably should. As a buyer, do you think your buyer might want to know this before they bid on this property? They're looking at it saying, hey, I guess that's as far back as the property goes. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe it goes further. The question is, do you need to know? Do you want to know? Does your client want to know? Do you think it adds value to your client's experience knowing this kind of thing? So that was a good example there. I like that one. My favorite one. Oh my goodness. And by the way, I looked at 6 survey plans for this presentation and I used 5 of them. That's how prevalent this kind of issue is, okay? We didn't have to go through an awful lot to find these examples. 5 out of 6 gave us everything we needed here. So let's look at this property. Again, the street is over on the right, okay? The street's to the right, and we're looking at the backyard. You're now familiar with what the main building looks like. It's that rectangle with the little hash marks on the inside. Got it? You with me? Yeah, you know this stuff by now, right? So let's start annotating this. Take a moment to take a look at some of this. Look at where the property boundary is, the thick dark line. Got it? You can see where the fences are, and hopefully you're looking at this going, oh my, I see it. Do you see it? It's a good one. This is a really good one. Part of the challenge, not challenge, part of what I really enjoy doing, I know many other people in the industry enjoy doing, is looking at a plan here and trying to visualize what this looks like in real life. What does it actually mean? Okay, so I understand what this means diagrammatically, but let me picture this in real life and what the consequences are to the people living in both properties. And that's what we're going to do on this one. So we're going to focus it on this area at the bottom, okay? That's where the real issues, the big issues lie. There are other issues that you can take a look at on here on the replay. Pause it and take a look. But we're going to focus down here in this particular area. Here's the first thing I want to highlight, right? The thick dark line is the property line. You know that. It's in blue now, all right? There's the property line right there. Now, There's an easement on this property. Aha, love the easements. Now, remember from our easement talk, you cannot block or obstruct an easement at any point in time. You cannot block or obstruct an easement at any point in time, all right? And an easement is a non-possessory instrument, non-possessory right to use someone else's land. So this looks like it's a mutual driveway, right? Because it's straddling the boundary, and there's an easement that covers both sides. We're not really that interested in that part of it. We're interested in the footprint and what else people have done on this particular easement. So, property line easement between the property. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you caught this here. Interestingly enough, the main building that we see, is actually encroaching on the easement. Don't know how that happened. Did they rebuild the property and build it incorrectly on the easement? Or has somehow the easement been miscalculated, or I don't know. I don't know. But that could be an issue that you might want to look into. If it's a new build, definitely an issue. Now, this is the fence in red, right? So we've got the boundary, we've got the easement. Now here's the fence. You see it? Right there. There's the fence. So what's the issue? Well, the issue is that we've got a fence that's way off the boundary on this side. And in fact, if you look at this fence and now start picturing what this might look like in real life, you've got two properties next to each other, and you've got a fence that's been built off the corner of the house next door all the way to the rear boundary, right? And what that means is that if you walk out of the property that we're actually studying here, if you walk into the backyard, what are you going to see? You're going to see this beautiful backyard, and you're going to see a fence to your left. Well, that fence is actually way over in on your neighbor's property. You don't own all the way up to that fence. You own up to the property line, the blue line. This piece of land right here, you don't own, but you're getting to use it. Now, on the buying side, you might go, let's not even talk about that. Good to know. It might get taken away someday, but you know what? We'll take it. Don't worry about it. On the listing side, do you disclose this? It's up to you. If it was me, I'd disclose this. I'd say, hey, it's going to sell anyway. I'm going to disclose it because that's one less thing anyone could come back to me or my client on after the fact. And what's interesting about this is if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the fence there, it tells you exactly what those dimensions are, how far off, 65 centimeters off. So again, over half a meter away from the boundary. That's a significant chunk of land. A couple of other really interesting pieces on this. The first is, as we said, the easement is, well, the building up there is on the easement. That's one thing. But you'll also notice that on the rear part of the easement, the house that we're looking at, look at the rear corner there. It says gate. There's a gate that's been put across there. Well, you're not allowed to block or obstruct an easement, and yet somebody's built a gate there. Not allowed, not permitted, shouldn't be happening. Anyway, another really good example there of how you can study a survey plan, and by just focusing in on the fence part of it, there's so much rich information you can get out of it. Come back on the replay, pause here, and look at some of the other places, because the fence isn't on, well, it's pretty much off all the way around this property, right? In some cases, just a couple of centimeters. In other cases, a little more. But this is one of those situations where you can provide immeasurable value to your client, on the buying side especially, by saying, look, is this something you want to be concerned about, or should we just go ahead with it? Okay, where do I build my fence? This is you, and this is your neighbor. Excuse me. I hope you have a great relationship with your neighbor. Not everyone does. We get so many calls all summer long with people who are in absolutely horrific situations with their neighbors, and we don't get it. I don't know why people can't just get along, but I guess they can't. Where do you build your fence? The answer is, it depends. So this is what your classic board fence looks like, right? You get posts, 4x4s, 6x6s, 6x6 posts, and then you get the fence boards that connect them, usually in 8 or 10-foot sections, right? Classic. But you also have the cement footing around each one, which can be a foot across. They can be 18 inches across, depending on how big the sonotubes are that are being used, or if they're being used at all. Maybe it's just plain concrete being poured in there. But the point is, you've got cement footings underground. I want you to remember that boundaries are not lines. Boundaries are planes, right? Planes that go underground and above ground into the air. So you can encroach on somebody's property underground. You can encroach on somebody's property overground. So it's important to remember that when it comes to things that you are building that may have an impact on your relationship with your neighbor. Now, in terms of this, where are you going to build it? Ideally, you want to build it with the center line of the fence on the boundary. If you've got a great relationship with your neighbor, you're splitting the cost, you know where the boundary is, stick it right on there. You both get to use the maximum amount of your own land. You're not having to give up land because of any sort of acrimony or dispute with your neighbor. This is the ideal situation. Remember, 99% of fences aren't like this. It's not necessarily though because that's a result of disputes. But what happens if your neighbor says, you know what, no, I don't want to, I'd love to, but I can't participate. I don't want to participate. It's all on you. Well, in that case, you might want to pull the fence in a little bit on your property so that you can actually take control of what happens to the far side, the other side, painting, staining, and all the rest of it if your neighbor isn't going to participate in it. And so in that case, what you might do is you might build it so that the face of the posts on the far side are on the boundary. And so the boards are in on your side by a couple of inches, right? What happens if you are in a massive fight with your neighbor and you've got one of those neighbors they will go to any length to try and stop you from doing anything on their property, and their reaction is so out of proportion in terms of what the actual grievance might actually be. In that case, we've seen this. We've actually seen this. They can say, your cement footing is encroaching on my property. Get it off my property. Well, you don't want to go and build a fence and find out that they have an issue with the cement footing of your fence that's encroaching on their property underground. So you might end up, if you've got that kind of situation, you might end up building it like this, way in on your property. Guys, this is why. These last two reasons are why the majority of fences are not on the boundary. It's not because people have made a mistake or people just didn't know or people are clueless. It's not because of that. It's because of these kinds of situations. And so it is so important for you to make sure that you understand where that boundary is and where the fence is in relation to that boundary so you can advise your clients accordingly. Okay, so I think we're getting on to the last slide now. What do you do if the fence is off the boundary? What do you do with fences and land status? Can I take my fence down? Can I take this fence down? How am I protected? The neighbor's fence is on my property. Can I rip it down? Well, it depends. First of all, don't just rip stuff down because it doesn't matter how you're protected according to land law. You've also got to understand the civil and criminal law as well. If you take if somebody else has built a fence and paid for it, and you rip it down, even if it's on your property, you can get chased and accused and charged potentially with destruction of property, right? It's like if I park my car on your driveway, does that give you the right to take a crowbar to the windshield? I don't think so, right? So always exercise caution in this. Don't have an overreaction. And please advise your clients this as well, because they don't want to say, hey, these are my rights according to land laws and get charged with destruction of property. There are ways with lawyers to deal with this stuff. But when it comes to land status, if you remember from a previous webinar that we did, it depends what the status of the land is. Is it an absolute title plus? Well, that fence, if it's on your property, you own all the way up to the boundary. Anything that's in on your side is yours. Theoretically and technically, you can just rip that fence out because it's on your property, therefore it's yours. Remember what I just said a minute ago about destruction of property there, okay? We're talking about purely the land side of things here. Is it an absolute title? Well, same kind of thing there. It's on your land. You are protected under the new land title system, and there's no adverse possession, there's no ability to go back, so you can't. Land title's qualified. There is an opportunity for adverse possession here. So you got to make sure that you're not being chased for an adverse possession claim because the neighbors had that fence there and they can prove it for 10 years prior to the date of conversion. Or is it still one of those very, very few pieces of property that are still in the registry system? Well, then it's, adverse possession is still something that can get pulled into play there. So it depends on the status of the land. Where do we find out what that status is? I want to hear 300 people right now all shout the same thing because you've been looking at the webinars. You know it, the parcel register, right? So that's that. So adverse possession, let's talk about adverse possession. We kind of already have, but how long can I prove use? Can I claim that piece of land? Say the fence is over on the other person's property. Can I claim adverse possession over it? Again, you got to go back to the parcel register and determine what is the land status. Because if your land is an absolute title plus or absolute title, you cannot under any circumstances. In fact, The next door neighbor has every right to rip that fence down, and good luck on your side of things, because the fence is actually on their property and they own all the way up. They are protected in their ownership all the way up to the property line. If it's land titles qualified, yeah, there is an opportunity to claim adverse possession if they can prove without a shadow of a doubt that they had that they occupied that land, that fence was there, and they've occupied that land for a period of 10 years, minimum of 10 years prior to the date of conversion from registry to land titles qualified. And obviously, if it's in the registry system, yeah, sure, they can start. You can start claiming that. You can go through that process. Whether you'll get it or not is a different matter, but at least you've met the basic threshold of qualification to make that claim. Let's talk about title insurance, because this is the one that really does matter. Title insurance and fences, always excluded. All 5 title insurers exclude fences from coverage. You cannot make a claim against, you cannot defend a claim. Your neighbor's making a claim against you saying, get your fence off their property, and you contact a title insurance and say, can you help? They'll say, no, it's excluded, too bad. And it's in there in the fine print every single time. So can you make a claim? No. There are some rare exceptions, but usually those exceptions aren't because of the fence. There's an other inherent issue that qualifies it for coverage, of which the fence gets sort of bundled in. But typically speaking, advise your clients if it's fence related, they're probably not going to get any love from the title insurer because it is expressly excluded. It's one of the things that are excluded in all 5 title insurance policies. So, finishing up, don't be that realtor. Fences and great boundary due diligence. Guys, don't be the realtor who doesn't care. And you're on this, you wouldn't be listening to me for half an hour if you didn't care, right? But don't be the realtor that doesn't care or who thinks it's somebody else's job. Don't be the realtor that's fallen for that line that title insurance covers everything. It doesn't cover anything to do with fences, okay? Who's willing to take to risk their client's happiness? Do not be that realtor who is willing to risk their client's happiness. If you're on the buying side, your client does not want to buy into a boundary dispute, a title insurance claim, a lawsuit, an argument, or a dispute with their neighbors. They don't want to buy into that. They want to buy into a happy next home. So help them with that by identifying some of these issues. At least bring them to their attention so that if they do go ahead and purchase the property, they've gone in with their eyes wide open. They understand what the issues are. Notwithstanding those issues, they've gone ahead and purchased that property. They're not going to be unpleasantly surprised and then come back at you and say, what the heck? 1 star out of 5 on Google for you. Thanks very much. And please don't be the realtor that thinks this stuff doesn't add value. Of course it adds value. It solidifies you in the real estate transaction as a critical part and a critical influence and a critical value provider to your client. It's not just about the staging and the pictures and the listing. It's about making sure that the land that's being transacted is being transacted effectively and being represented effectively. And on the selling side, that your client you are representing that property in a way that's accurate and it's not going to result in trailing liabilities. And on the buying side, that your client's intended use of land is being satisfied or will be satisfied with no unpleasant surprises. Okay, that's it. Let's go on to the BoundaryWise Academy. And if you haven't signed up already, guys, come on, you got to sign up. A couple of questions here before we go forward. Does title insurance help if you built an in-ground swimming pool and then you're told half of it is on the farmer's land who resides behind you? Wow, that sounds like a real situation. So you moved in. If it's the case that you moved in and you built a swimming pool and then found out that when you built that swimming pool, it was built over the boundary, the answer is no. Title insurance will not cover you for that. It doesn't cover you for mistakes that you made after you moved in. It covers you, generally speaking, in very general terms, it covers you for things that you inherited that you didn't know about when you bought that are title related. So yes, wow, that's yeah, don't do that. Make sure when you build your pool that the surveyor comes in and shows you where your boundary is, and make sure that your builder builds way in according to the setbacks and everything else. My goodness, that's a nasty one. Okay, BoundaryWise Academy, here we go. Professional education for top realtors. Guys, you got to get on this. We got hundreds of agents already in Ontario that are on this, who've taken advantage of some of this downtime during COVID. This is online education for realtors, for Ontario realtors. This is not education that's covered by OREA or RICO or the new Humber system. This is grades above that in terms of quality, in terms of intensity, in terms of knowledge and value you can provide. It's only 7 to 10 hours of video training that you can take at your own pace. We have many agents who sign up on a Friday or a Wednesday. By Friday, they're done. Sign up on Friday. By Sunday, they've graduated. Teaching assisting support, teaching assistant support, quizzes, exams. It's tough. You've got to get 80%. This isn't for everyone. This is for the 10%. And we want you to be part of that 10%. You get knowledge, you get tools and resources, you get process just like this. Only what we did today is a snapshot of the entire program. And most importantly, when you graduate, you get the BoundaryWise designation, CBW. It's a professional designation that stands for Certified BoundaryWise. And that tells your clients that you have gone above and beyond in qualifying for a designation in something that matters to them and their well-being and their purchase or sale. You get hotline support for 1 year. Not hotline support while you're taking the tests and stuff. Of course, we're there to support you through that. But after that, you can call us at any point in time, email us, and ask us any question you want about your property, land-related question about your property, about easements, about a survey plan. You get a survey from the seller. You're looking at it and you think there might be an issue. Who's going to help you? If you're a CBW agent in good standing, you can call us and for free we'll answer those questions for you. That is so important. You've got us in your back. You've got Protect Your Boundaries in your back pocket, on speed dial, on email at all times, and a whole bunch of other amazing stuff there that you get as part of this. You will generate more leads. Guaranteed you will generate more leads. You will win more listings when you're competing against other agents, and we show you the package you take into your listing presentation that shows how much further ahead you are from your competitors. You will win more listings, I promise you. This will help you protect higher commission rates. Your commission rates are under an enormous amount of pressure because people are believing you're not providing the kind of value that is commensurate with the percentage that is getting charged on a purchase or sale. This helps put some counter pressure on that downward pressure by saying, look, I'm adding all this additional value to help you. This isn't just about staging and pictures and drone footage and the listing, right? It's more than that. And finally, you get to complete safer deals, which helps you, helps your client, helps your brokerage, helps you build a phenomenal career. So join us at BoundaryWise.ca. Go there now. Don't delay. Join us at BoundaryWise.ca and sign up. Jess, my colleague Jessica, is going to send you some discount codes, and hopefully, I know, am I saying the right thing, Jess? Maybe she's going to start screaming at me saying no discount codes. Well, you have to now, Jess. Okay, you'll get some discount codes. Let's get you online, get you graduated, and hey, we'll see you next week for another webinar. So hope you had a good time here. It ran a little late, but I think this was a valuable one. And hopefully we'll see you next week for another topic. If you have any ideas for topics, let us know, and we'll see if we can pull it in there. Guys, have a great week. Get out there, be successful, be productive, and we'll see you next week, okay? Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.